So we're going to go around the room and just do some quick introductions so that everybody can get to know everybody who's both attending remotely and in person. Kim Monteith is moderating this session, and maybe Kim can start by introducing herself.
Hi, everybody. It's Kim here. I'm the manager of behavior and welfare for the BC SPCA, and I'm just lucky to be here to moderate. If you have any questions, just message me, and I will pass them on.
/ help answer them.
Help answer them, sure. Okay, next.
I'm Michelle Haddikin. I'm the operations coordinator for the SPCA working out of Vancouver. Bye.
Hi, Jody Dunlop, branch manager, Vancouver.
Christy Lewis, regional animal management support, working out of the Lower Mainland.
Hi, I'm Allie. I'm a fourth year vet student doing my rotation here from the Atlantic Veterinary College.
Hi, Sarah Jones. I'm the regional manager for the Lower Mainland and Fraser Valley.
Hi, I'm Amelia Gordon, and I'm the senior manager animal health.
Hello, I'm Iris. I am the regional manager for Northern BC in Vancouver. I also oversee new operations programs as well.
So in terms of the people who are joining us online, do you want me to just say who you are, or do you want to message? How should we do this, Tim?
I think you should introduce.
Okay, I'm just going to introduce those of you who are joining on the line or by computer, and if you have more that you want everyone to know about you, then just message Kim and tell her, and I'll add it. Okay, so we have Jeff, who's a volunteer at the Vancouver branch, joining us on the phone. We have Gerald Whittle, Jerry, who's the branch manager in Prince Rupert. We have Graham Wright, who's our regional manager on the island. We've got Katie Hegel, who is an ACA 3 in South Peace. And then we've got Tracy Westmoreland, who is our regional manager of the interior.
And I'll just add that Jeff's a cat wellness volunteer here in Vancouver.
Oh, perfect. Okay, I think that's everyone. Okay, so we're going to get started. So actually, I'm curious to get a read on the group in terms of your background with Capacity for Care. How many of you have viewed the LMS course on Capacity for Care that was put together by Kim using the video presentation from Kate Hurley when she was here, Dr. Kate Hurley? Okay, so we have most people in the room who have access to the LMS. And what about online? Can you guys just weigh in quickly if you have been able to view that material? Okay, so it looks like most of the people who are joining us on the webinar have. If you have not, then definitely, if you don't have access to the LMS, talk to your manager about getting access, because those are great. That's great information, and it's under the animal management section. And then the second thing is, how many of you have either filled out a monthly Capacity for Care worksheet, or you have read the SOP on how to fill it out, or it's been part of your job to review those worksheets and help people fill them out? Just maybe show of hands in the room. Okay. Everybody's okay, so pretty much everyone in this room, except for Ali, our vet student. Pretty much everyone. We can only see the messages as they pop up. We can't see the random messages, so tell me if there's something.
Yeah, no, you haven't missed anything.
Okay, so I think most of the people who are joining us online as well. So that's great, because we're going to kind of dive deeper into Capacity for Care, but it sounds like most of you have already have some familiarity with the Capacity for Care program. So as you probably know, Capacity for Care, or C4C as we'll probably call it for the rest of this presentation, is an initiative that is meant to both increase animal welfare and reduce the length of stay in our shelters. And basically what it does is it's kind of revolutionary because it helps us determine capacity in a whole new way from what we've traditionally done. And it helps us determine capacity based on our ability to provide the best possible welfare for the animals, looking at it from the animal standpoint. It was developed by shelter medicine experts at UC Davis, and it's been kind of spreading across both Canada and the US. So I just want to do a quick one-word check-in to see how everyone's feeling, because I know that capacity for care elicits mixed emotions here at the BCSPCA. So we're just going to go around the room, and maybe we'll start with everyone who's joining us online, just because we've been neglecting you guys. Can you just type in, what's the first word that comes to mind with regard to how you're feeling right now about this discussion?
Can't see it. Tracy's not happy. They should be released.
Okay, so wait, Kim's going to read them all to us.
So Tracy's feeling happy. Jerry's feeling interested. Jeff is interested also, which is good. And Katie. Oh, Graham's encouraged. Sorry, Graham, I forgot. Missed you. And Katie's feeling probably pressure right now. Is that
Different word. What's a different word?
Oh, she's excited to learn more. Feeling the pressure too. Now can we go around?
Yeah, so let's go around backwards. So Iris.
I was going to say I'm excited.
Intrigued.
Curious.
Interested.
Refreshing.
Excited.
I'm feeling a little anxious, but it has nothing to do with the webinar. It's just the technical part.
I know. Yeah, me too. I'm also feeling anxious about this webinar and the fact that we're being recorded. But that's okay. Everything will be fine. It will all be over at noon. Okay, so that's awesome, and I'm glad. Sometimes I recently visited a branch, and sometimes when we do the one-word check-in about C4C, people are like, not all of the words are positive, so it's good. I think it's great that we're excited to have this discussion, and I hope that everyone leaves and is excited about the program and leaves with just a little bit of like pearls that you can apply in your shelter or in your job here at the SPCA. So this is our brand new, thanks to Kim and a volunteer that Kim has found from Community Relations,
Yeah.
I think. We have a brand new infographic, which was developed when we started working on our new website. And what it does is it shows the 9 elements of capacity for care, and we're going to go through each of them and have a discussion about each one. So this webinar is meant to be discussion based, and what we'll do is we'll start with kind of hearing from you guys what your take is on each of these elements, and then we have some summary slides that we put together just so we don't forget anything, so we don't forget like the details of the elements, but mainly it'll just be more a discussion. And there's plenty of time, so if people have any questions as we go along, please ask them. And I know that there are some kind of difficult conversations around capacity for care that occur, so if anybody has questions that they feel like, you know, they're nervous to ask, then just ask them, because we want to get all of that out there and talk about it, and someone else probably is thinking and feeling the same way you are. So we're going to start off with the most dry and boring part of capacity for care, which is the numbers part of it. And then we'll go into some of what I think is more interesting, and hopefully everybody will enjoy. So are there any questions so far? Anyone? Okay. Okay, so this is really kind of the formula that underlies capacity for care. It's really important to remember that this formula is not the whole thing. So the formula is just part of it. It's the data part that underlies what we do and kind of helps. It's a tool that we can use to help us with this initiative. And what it does is it basically lays out, it's very simple. So the adoption-driven capacity, and the adoption-driven capacity is the number of animals that you should optimally have in your shelter in order to optimize adoptions. And that's equal to just 2 things. One is the monthly daily average adoptions. So that's the number of adoptions you have every month divided by the number of days in the month. So say there's about 30 days in every month and you do about 30 adoptions a month, your monthly daily adoptions is going to be 1. And then the LOS, as you guys have all heard, is the targeted length of stay. So we'll talk more about what the targeted length of stay means But that's not the actual length of stay for animals in your shelter. It's the target that we want based on industry targets for animal welfare. And typically it's around 7 to 14 days in the industry, so we'll talk about how that applies to us. And then we're going to go through just an example of how this works. So I just want everyone to consider two different shelters, Shelter A and Shelter B. So for Shelter A, the monthly daily average adoption is 1 per day, and their length of stay is 14 days. And for Shelter B, their monthly daily average adoption is also 1, and their length of stay is 30 days. So that's just the average for the animals in their care. So I'm curious to hear from you guys what you think. Just quickly, without overthinking it, which shelter has more cats in their care today? Okay, I have 1 vote for Shelter A. Who thinks it's Shelter A? Show of hands. Which shelter has more cats in their care today? Or on any day, really, because these are all averages.
Shelter B. Oh, yeah, sorry.
Sorry, Shelter B.
Okay,
Yeah.
sorry, I have no votes for Shelter A. All right, who thinks that Shelter B has more cats in care? Okay, I have a few tentative votes for Shelter B. No one online seems to have voted. And who thinks that, does anybody think that they'll have the same number of cats in their care on any given day?
Doesn't it depend on how much cages they have?
Yeah.
What do you guys think who are joining us from out there in the world? Does anyone want to type your thoughts?
I think you'll have more cats going through Shelter A.
Okay. I'm not sure if I should just keep going or if I should just wait. Okay. All right. So Shelter A, the cats on average are staying for 14 days, but because the monthly daily adoption number, so the number of cats that are going out of the shelter is the same for both shelters. The shelter that has more cats kind of in line, the shelter that has more cats in care is Shelter B, because each cat is staying for 30 days, but the cats are exiting the shelter at the same rate. So basically, it's like if you are in a super long line at the bank or at Starbucks and it's just reached a steady state and it's super long because everyone stays in it for a certain amount of time. It doesn't matter if there's also a short line and people are leaving at the same rate. That long line where everyone stays for a long time, it's going to stay the same length. So you're going to have, and that's why we naturally get anxious when you approach, when you open the door of Starbucks and you see a super long line, because it evokes anxiety, right? So this shelter that has a length of stay of 30 days will have twice as many cats in it at any time than the shelter that has a length of stay of 14 days. And if you think about kind of how that would feel, you guys all have worked in shelters, so think about how you would feel and how the cats would feel if there were twice as many of them at any given time. So here's a question: which shelter adopts out more cats at every year? Say at the end of the year, which shelter has adopted out more cats? Just based on the numbers.
Wouldn't it be the same because they only adopt out 1 a month?
All right, who thinks that it's Shelter A? Okay, who thinks that it's the same? I have votes for both of those. Who thinks it's Shelter B? Okay, good job, guys. So based solely on this, on the numbers alone, they adopt out the same number because the monthly daily average adoption number is, because I've told you that it's the same. However, the reason why this is confusing is that some of you intuitively took the next step, which is awesome, which you thought, but Shelter A has the ability to adopt out more cats, right? Shelter A has the ability and the capacity to adopt out and take in and to help more animals than Shelter B. In these numbers that I showed you, they don't actually. In these numbers that I showed you, I made them equal on purpose. But Shelter A, life is going to be easier, and you're going to have the capacity to help more because you'll have some empty cages, some space, and some breathing room. So I've probably just given it away, but the last question, and this is just, I want to set the stage for really thinking about this from the standpoint of the cat and from the standpoint of the people who are caring for the cat. Which shelter provides better welfare for the cats and the staff? Would you rather work in a shelter that has, 14 cats at a time or a shelter that has 30 cats at any one time? And in which shelter would you rather be a cat? In which shelter will you be less stressed, get more enrichment, get more playtime, out of cage time? Yeah, so does anybody have questions about, or it doesn't make sense intuitively, about why having fewer cats in the shelter at one time and having them move through faster provides both cats and your team with better welfare? Okay. Excellent. Good job. Oops. Okay, I don't know why that's...
Wrong arrow.
Yeah. Oh, right. Okay, yeah, because I have to click left to... Okay. Sorry.
That's okay.
Okay, so we're going to talk through the 9 essential elements of C4C, and you already saw them on the infographic, but I want to dive into them because it's really easy. Like, when you look at the numbers, when you look at the adoption-driven capacity, it's really easy to think, oh, that makes sense. But then a lot of times the next thing we think is, oh, but like it doesn't apply to me. I can't do that in my shelter. Like there's too many cats that need to come in, or there aren't enough adopters. So that's why capacity for care really encompasses a lot more than just the formula. And I think initially when it was rolled out, we focused heavily on the formula, and the formula is a tool, so we need to focus on it. But what I think we kind of didn't fully talk about and fully make sure that everyone understood and that everyone had access to was that it really is a comprehensive program, and that there are lots of different tricks and things that people can do to achieve, to get within that adoption-driven capacity. And I forgot to say something that I usually say at the beginning, which is that the reason why this came about is, the reason why this work came about and why this program was developed based on science is that it had been realized that when cats stay in the shelter for a long time, that they're less likely to get adopted and they're more likely to get sick. And there were some really interesting studies on consumer choice that showed that if consumers are inundated with a large number of choices, that what happens is, it's just human nature, they get fatigued and overwhelmed, and they start to feel guilty about all the choices they're not making, and it renders them less likely to make a choice at all. So studies on things like the number of jam jars that are available in grocery stores showed us that if you offer fewer, more will actually leave. People will actually take more. And so you can only imagine how it makes people feel when they go into a really busy animal shelter like Netflix. Yeah, exactly. I've spent like an hour trying to decide what to watch on Netflix, and then I just go to bed because I'm like, it's too late. I don't have time to watch anything. So that's exactly it. So imagine though, like Netflix and jam jars, like those are things that are, fairly devoid of any sort of emotional or like ethical weight, right? Like for some of us, I guess. So imagine people coming into animal shelters, and if there's anything we can do to minimize those feelings of like guilt and overwhelm, and being overwhelmed by like all the sick cats and just leaving without taking any of them, that will really benefit our cats, because you would think that that type of science would apply even more in a setting that's kind of fraught with emotion, like people going to an animal shelter to save a cat and take the cat home. So that's where this came from. I wanted you to know that it was based on science, and that it came from consumer science, and that it's shown some really interesting results when it's been applied in animal shelters. And it's generally shown that in animal shelters that were part of the initial studies for this, when they basically just sort of remove some of their adoptable cats from view, so they would reduce the population in adoptions, they would increase the adoptions by sometimes like 40%, just by basically like closing some of the rooms. Like they didn't do anything spectacular. It was just by reducing the number of cats available. So that demonstrates that the formula works, but how do we actually get there? Like how do we manage our populations in a way that is consistent with these principles and allows the actual capacity in the community for cats to go out into good homes, to kind of drive what's coming in and how we manage our population? And the first way that we look at that is by looking at our true capacity. So true capacity is number 2. I'm just going to go through them in order. So we were talking about it in the room before we started, and our determination of our true capacity, we've already talked about one component of that, which is our adoption-driven capacity. What else do you guys think should go into determining what is your true capacity? How many animals can you truly care for and provide them with good welfare?
I think your staffing levels.
Staffing levels. So absolutely. So even if you have all the cages in the world, if you don't have all the staff in the world to take care of those animals, then you can't provide them with good welfare, right? Staffing is really, really important. What else?
Funding.
Funding. So that goes to, so funding for things like what?
Like the food or the care for them, veterinary care.
Yes, exactly. So we found, as we started tracking over the last year, that only 30 to 35% of the animals that come into our care are healthy and free of any mental or physical problem that requires treatment. So we know that we need resources, like staffing, funding, resources for behavior work, resources for veterinary medical care. So all of that goes into that kind of funding kind of bucket. What else?
Space.
Space. So physical space. If you're like me, many of you started working in shelters a long time ago, and the only determinant of capacity at that time was physical space. And that is the language that the public understands, right? Physical space. Like if you are not able to help someone right away, oh, we don't have space, oh, we're full, right? That's language that people understand. Like if you don't have physical space, then you don't have space. So we don't want to say that physical space is not important. Physical space is usually represented in our materials as it's called PHC, or physical holding capacity. So if you see that PHC, that's what it means for physical space. But physical space is definitely a huge consideration as well. And what else?
Jerry said volunteers.
Volunteers. So what kinds of volunteers do you need to consider in your capacity? Good, Jerry. It's another resource.
Cat companions.
Like Jen. All right, so cat companions, cat welfare, cat enrichment. What else? What other types of volunteers would be important for kind of maintaining and determining your capacity?
I was going to say fosters.
Fosters are huge, right? Your foster homes are your virtual shelter. So fosters cross that boundary between volunteers and physical capacity and are something that absolutely needs to be considered. Not only how many fosters do you have, what are they capable of doing, how many animals are already in foster, do you have staff to manage the foster program and to check up on all the animals that are in foster? So all of those issues around fostering are really, really important. What else?
Jerry elaborated on people to come in and hang out with the cats and kittens.
Yeah, so in order to provide them with good welfare, so cats are social, right? Cats are social animals. So part of providing them with good welfare is providing them with a level of social interaction with people that they choose. And in order to do that, for some cats that might not be very high, but in order to do that, you need those volunteers to come in because generally we don't provide enough staff in our shelters to fully do that. What else?
What about physical holding capacity, having the humane spaces, like humane cages, not just
Yes. Yes. So Sarah mentioned physical holding capacity, which is, we define that technically as just the number of cages, right? But this is a really good point. We are still working on getting into compliance with the Canadian Standards of Care. So we've identified, and I know a lot of you have been working with your RMs and with Kim and I, we still have 14 shelters out of 36 where some of the cat holding spaces do not meet the guidelines that were set forth in the Canadian Standards of Care. We're going to talk more about that space next, but absolutely. So if you do not have, if you have the physical space but it's not adequate for the needs of that animal, then it doesn't count as physical space. So that's a really, really good point. What else?
Transfer.
Yeah.
Your transfer options.
Yeah, absolutely. So Iris said transfer, just in case everyone couldn't hear. But that is huge, right? So we've expanded the transfer program, and in part to help shelters that are struggling to stay within capacity for care and move animals out to have more options to transfer. And so many times what we want people to start thinking about is even before animals come in, especially if it's a large surrender, sometimes it's a CAD surrender, we want to start thinking about transfer out options even before they come in when we're determining what is our capacity, because your capacity might actually be exponentially larger than you think if you consider all the other shelters that work as part of our team. There's one other thing that I can think of, because I'm a veterinarian. Can anybody think of another, what's another bottleneck sometimes?
Isolation room?
Your appointments.
Yeah, so that's actually, you guys brought up a couple of good points. I was thinking actually what Ira said, which is the availability of veterinary appointments for the types of animals that you want to take in. But the type of housing, such as isolation capacity versus adoptions capacity, is also really important. And I think Jody and Christy both said that at the same time. Or a few people over there said that. So the type of housing that it matches the medical needs and the veterinary care needs of the animals. But also in some communities, the availability of veterinary care or behavior care is quite limited. So it might mean that in those communities that alternative pathways need to be found or that some more advanced planning needs to occur as part of considering our capacity. So I think you guys got everything that we thought of for the next slide, and I think even more. Does anybody else have any other ways to determine our capacity? How should we be thinking about it? Okay. So we went through all of this, adoption-driven capacity plus staffing, physical capacity, including the type of space, the size of the space, foster capacity, ability to provide good welfare. So both of those are mainly related to volunteer availability, ability at vet appointments, and then ability to treat health and behavior problems. So actually what Michelle said about the cage size, it basically just feeds into the you're like, you keep feeding into the next one. It's like a plan to help us stay on track. Okay. So we're going to talk a little bit about the portalization of cages. So when I first started working in animal shelters a long time ago in California, and I first started hearing about portalizing cages, and basically taking the number of cages that you have and then basically cutting it by half or into half or a third of what it was, I was really scared. I was like, oh my God, that's so scary. Because every time we portalize a cage, then we have like one fewer cage. But it's great because now what we've learned in combination with this science of how people choose things and knowing what cats need, we've learned that there are actually, to the best of our ability, we know now what sort of individually and communally housed cats need in terms of floor space, and it's in the Canadian Standards of Care. Can anyone tell me what the number of square feet is that individually housed cats need?
11 square feet.
11 square feet, yes. What about communally or group housed cats?
18.
18 square feet. Yes, 18. And there's people on the webinar too, Graham, and who said the same thing. Okay, so that's fantastic. So there aren't a ton of studies on this, so this information might change over time, but there are some, and one of the things that we know is that cats do better when there's a certain amount of separation in between their sort of main areas. So if you're a cat, what are the 3 zones in your cage? Or really if you're any animal, including people, like what are the sort of 3 types of activities that you need to do every day in order to meet all of your biological functions?
Sleep, eat, go to the bathroom.
Yes, so sleep, eat, go to the bathroom. Food, chill, bathroom. I like that. Actually, I think chill applies more to cats because they spend a lot of time just like chilling but not actually sleeping. They also spend a lot of time sleeping. So there are some interesting studies looking at the number of feet that need to be present between a cat's elimination area, eating area, and sleeping or resting area. Does anybody know what that number of feet is? Has anybody seen like that triangle diagram? I know Dr. Hurley uses it sometimes. 2 feet. 2 feet. Yeah, so 2 feet. So Graham, 2 feet. So 2 feet is not very much. But in traditional cat cages and veterinary hospitals and shelters, the way that all of us kind of grew up caring for cats, the cages were 24 inches wide, and that's 2 feet. So sometimes if the cat was lucky, the cage was like 28 to 30 inches wide. It's literally impossible if the cage is only 24 to 28 inches deep and 24 to 28 inches high. It's literally impossible to achieve that separation. So the 11 square feet achieves that separation, and that's one of the things that it comes from. In terms of portalization, so how many of you, does everybody have some portalized cage? Everybody has some portalized cages. Yes. So some of you have some that are double and some that are triple. So if the cage compartments are 24 inches or smaller, then you need at least 3 to get to the 11 square feet. If you want to have 2 compartments, then each one needs to be 30 inches wide, and then you get to like, it's 10.8, which we've decided is okay, just because 30 is a standard modular cage measurement. So if you're going back, if you're looking in your shelters, if you're walking around vet hospitals or other shelters or whatever, just remember that kind of 30 inches across, each compartment is kind of what's needed to achieve the minimum if it has 2 compartments. Kim, is there anything else Does anybody have questions about, I can't remember what I put on the slide. I think I just put the numbers on the slide.
No, I mean, in the beginning when we first implemented this and we started portalizing, the big concern from the public and volunteers and staff was that we were refusing cats. So does this mean we're going to refuse cats?
Mm-hmm.
We can answer that later, but this is just, it was a big piece of when we didn't start portalizing.
Okay, so that makes sense. So we will talk about it later around communication and managed intake, but I guess let's get a show of hands. How many of you felt the way I felt when I first learned about this, which is like apprehensive, like I was kind of afraid of the reduction in the physical holding capacity that would result when we portalize? Like, how many of you are either a little bit afraid or you're a little hesitant, or you have met volunteers or members of the public who are hesitant? Okay, so pretty much like half of the people were like me, who were sort of hesitant initially, and then pretty much everyone has encountered someone who, like Graham's community chair, volunteers, who have been hesitant. And I think that's normal, right? Like, you're talking about having or less the capacity in your shelter, the physical capacity, so that's pretty scary.
I think that's why this concept here is really important to understand why, so that we can explain why we portalize, why it's important, why the cats need it, and it's based on science.
Yeah, so hopefully everyone heard what Kim just said. I think that the apprehension is a normal human reaction to this type of drastic reduction in physical holding capacity. But Kim highlighted, and this is kind of why this is early in the presentation, that really we need to think about it from the cat standpoint. We're an evidence-based organization. We know what cats need. If someone had said, let's put a cat in a 10-inch, wide cage, we would have said, no, absolutely not. So we need to say, no, absolutely not, if the cage is less than 60 inches. And it's really, to the cat, it's really similar in terms of them not being able to kind of have what they need. And so we'll talk about kind of communication with the public. And the other thing to remember is that if you are moving cats through twice as fast, so when we started Capacity for Care in 2012, our average length of stay in our shelters for cats was 45 days. Now, does anybody know what it is?
Michelle does.
Is it like 17 for cats?
Yeah, so depending on when we read it, it's been 17 to 18 now for at least the last 8 to 10 months. And so we've halved our length of stay. So even though we've also halved our physical holding capacity, when we cut the length of stay in half, essentially we can hold the same number of cats and have the same number of cats in care potentially, even if we were to have twice as many cats, just because they're not staying as long. So I think it was Graham who kind of said something last year that I thought was really useful, which is in terms of explaining this to other people, you can explain it as, well, before we would have had one cat in this cage for 40 days, but now we only have one cat for 20 days. So even if there's an empty cage next to him, or he's taking up 2 cages for that 20 days, we're actually still helping the same number of cats. And every empty cage just represents an animal who would have stayed longer, but now is out in the community. So the animal still came in, was still helped, but instead of living in that cage for that other 25 days, they're just living out in the community. And if you think about what the cat would prefer, like, I think we all know that the cat would prefer to be out in the community. Okay, so the one thing that I forgot to say, but I think hopefully everyone kind of was thinking and has internalized and lives this, is that what it comes down to is the 5 freedoms. Mm-hmm. And what it comes down to is that there's science now that tells us what cats need in order to experience that minimally. And in the Canadian Standards of Care, when it talks about even these large floor allowances, it does say that once you get to stays over 2 to 3 weeks, you're kind of transitioning from like what we would consider a medium-term stay to what we would consider a long-term stay. And at that point, generally we do need to even consider more what they need, and that often will include out-of-cage time or thinking about fostering or other options for them. So this is these guidelines are meant for those kind of short to medium-term stays, which is anywhere from a few days to a few weeks. And beyond that, we have to start thinking outside the cage. Okay, so the next element, so actually, any questions about portalization and floor space?
I was just going to mention, too, the fact that when we did this, there was a lot of negative feedback, but the amount of animals that got upper respiratory and actually had to go into isolation dropped enormously.
Yeah. Yeah, so who remembers when we worked in shelters and it was very common for cats to come in and then get upper respiratory while they were in our care? Everybody's nodding.
All the time.
He's been here for a long time. So that's the most common shelter infectious disease. If you talk to any veterinarian about shelter medicine, they're like, oh yeah, upper respiratory infection. So what was happening is that healthy cats were coming in, people were entrusting us with them, and every shelter, like shelters where I worked too in California, and they were getting sick in our care, and we were making them sick because of the way we were housing them and managing them. So now, when we think of upper respiratory, at least as a veterinarian in the organization, I often think of it as something that animals from kind of bad environments come in with. So I often think of it as, cats from hoarders or a lot of CID cases, or sometimes like we'll have, one cat that comes in and then a few cats will get sick, but we generally won't see these shelter-wide outbreaks. We generally don't have it as kind of a shelter-acquired disease, and we are not moving cats to isolation and then euthanizing them after we've made them sick any longer. And there are a lot of things that have kind of helped us get to that point, but I would say that this Capacity for Care initiative is the main one, because we don't do a lot of statistical tracking of disease, but there was some tracking that was done in 2012 and 2013 because Vancouver piloted this and then it spread across the province in 2013. And we did document, at least anecdotally, that a dramatic reduction in upper respiratory, especially acquired in the shelter. Yeah, so that's actually a really good point. I was speaking more from the welfare side, but of course part of welfare is one of the 5 freedoms is freedom from illness and injury. So if they're getting sick because we made them sick, obviously that's not good welfare.
So Amelia, if you had a shelter where they were having continuous outbreaks, but they just couldn't get rid of the upper respiratory, what's the first thing you would look at?
So if I had a shelter where they were having continuous outbreaks, which has happened, that has happened in a couple of our shelters over the last few years, the first thing that I look at is, there's 2 pieces of it. So one is the medical side. So the first thing I look at is trying to get a diagnosis, like what agent is it viral, is it bacterial, like what's causing it. We have had a couple of outbreaks that were just caused by inappropriate, like the wrong antibiotic being used. But usually I'm able to get through that pretty fast. I look at when they're vaccinated, I look at if they've already had antibiotics or diagnostics, and then I move to the big piece of my work, which is looking at animal management. So the first thing that I do is I pull the C4C worksheets. I look at the C4C worksheets, and we'll talk about kind of how we look through those. And I look at I ask the branch manager one question. And that one question, besides where's your C4C worksheet, is, do you and your staff feel stressed? Do you and your staff feel like you're overwhelmed? Do you feel like you have too many cats? Do the cats feel crowded and stressed? And every single time, based on the response to that question, I know what's wrong and I know what we have to do. So yeah, Capacity for Care. Okay, so I don't want to talk about upper respiratory ever again. Okay, so fast tracking. So how many of you guys would say that your shelter actively fast tracks animals through the system? And you know what it is, and you're like pretty comfortable with what it is?
I think we're pretty good.
There are some tentative nods in the room. Did anybody?
No one online.
Okay.
Oh. Tracy, yes.
Okay. Good.
Graham, yes.
Okay. Excellent. So, can anyone describe to me, not Kim, what is fast? Sorry, Kim. What do you think of? What do you think fast tracking is? What are the activities that you would do in order to fast track an animal? What is it?
How do you even describe it? For us, well, there's a few things for us, but one of the big things we started to, one of the big things we started to do was even when we're getting a stray cat in, we'll still let people put an application in for it, because then that way, if, we make it quite clear that if an owner comes forward, they get their cat back, obviously, but we make it, once we've done that process with them, at the end of that 4 days, we already know that there is an approved application for this cat if it isn't claimed, and it can go right away. So it's not stuck.
Graham and Tracy have said the same. Viewing during stray hold, stray on the adoption floor.
So the stray cats are coming in, and instead of going into an intake room, they're going onto the adoption floor, as long as they look healthy and like not covered in ringworm type of thing. So the stray cats are on the adoption floor, and the public can view them. What else?
Book their spay appointment too.
Yeah. So Iris said book their spay appointment.
Tracy says timely medical identification and treatment. Graham's healthy, adoptable, and quick to adopt areas. Oh, Jerry? Who's Jerry? Graham.
Oh.
Who's Graham?
Oh, sorry.
So,
Sachi.
so basically identifying healthy cats, booking their spay appointments, booking their neuter appointments, and basically any veterinary sort of care that you know that they'll need, especially if you're in a community where there's tons of delays and you can't always get animals in right away. What else?
Getting the kittens up front right away. Getting them up and out.
Yeah, so particularly animals that are really fast to adopt. So not just if they appear healthy, if you know, like everybody, you all know which animals go out quickly in your shelters. So if it's like a, healthy 8-week-old like ginger tabby kitten that's completely friendly, that animal's not going to stay very long, right? So actually taking the initiative and moving animals, like say you do only have one cage in adoptions, or say there is only one, your vet can display one litter of cats or something one weekend for you, or like taking those ones that you know will go through quickly and moving them through as fast as possible in order to leave more time and resources for other animals.
And Jerry's added regular transfers to get the animals to higher populated areas.
Yeah, so that's fantastic too. So if you know that your population within your smaller community, the adoption capacity is lower, identifying those animals that would be good transfer candidates and moving them through quickly. And we'll talk more too about like what you do for all the animals that aren't fast tracked when we talk about animal management, because it's not that you don't also try to do things for them as you go along and plan. But really fast tracking is about taking those ones that you know will go fast and making them go even faster, making them go as fast as possible. And what that may mean is that sometimes you have to choose a resource that can only go to one cat, and you have to choose a cat that might go faster instead of slower. And I just want to quickly say, because everybody is being so great, but is there anybody for whom a discussion of putting stray animals in adoptions, letting them be viewed by the public, letting them have applications, and or taking animals out of order, like instead of the order in which they came in, they go up for adoption and get promoted, etc., you're taking the fast track ones and you're doing that for them faster. Is there anybody who is sort of slightly uneasy with either of those concepts? Because I think it is common and normal to kind of feel a little hesitation about that.
Graham says still some hesitation in some areas.
Okay.
And I would agree. I've seen a few branches where people are just hesitant to do that. Like they're used to their old routine, and then what if the owner comes forward? What if there's a medical? Mm-hmm. So there's that hesitation.
Yeah, or that it's fundamentally unfair for like that neuter appointment to go to that 1-year-old ginger tabby instead of that 12-year-old black cat that also needs dental and blood work and fostering, and like because that that cat's been there longer and this appointment just came up. I would say that even when I started here in 2014, there were still branches, and I suspect there are still branches that don't allow viewing of strays. Part of it is sometimes the way we build our shelters, that the space isn't flexible, so there are some security issues with allowing the public into sort of stray areas, and it's hard to house strays in adoptions because, for example, adoptions is all communal. You cannot just randomly group animals based on when they came in. That's unacceptable in the guidelines. And so sometimes there are security issues or physical issues that make that difficult. But what I would say is that, does anyone know the return to owner rate for stray cats in North America or at the SPCA?
I think it's like 10%.
Less North America wise.
It's
8.
Yeah, so I think the published rate is 8%. In some shelters it varies, in some shelters it's less. In some shelters, especially where there are cat bylaws, it could be more into the 20s. I've never heard of a shelter where it's over that. So if a stray cat comes in with no ID, the chances of that cat being an RTO are so low, definitely under 8%, but well under 8%, because in those 8% are often the animals who have ID and have tattoos and microchips and collars and tags. So if they come in and they have literally no ID whatsoever, the chances of them going back to an owner are like minute, like maybe 1%, maybe 2%. So of course there's that legal strayhold. We're not saying send cats home within that 4 days, but allowing them to be viewed and allowing people to fall in love with them and put in applications is totally fine, because statistically you're going to win most of the time. And even if the cat goes home, that's still a win, right? Like, those people will probably just want to adopt a different cat. And if you explain to them how great this is and you control the messaging, then you shouldn't really have a problem. So that uneasiness and hesitation, I think, is normal, and I wanted to recognize it. I had that at first too, because I'm from like a place where it was very old school, and we like did not do that. Like, that room was locked and you could only go in with staff. But it's called open selection. If you hear about it in other webinars or continuing education, the idea of allowing strays to be housed in adoptions to be viewable and have applications is called open selection, and it is a best practice now in shelter medicine and in animal sheltering. So it's very important. With the kind of fairness idea, the first come, first serve for resources, what I would say is that the cats don't know who came in first. All they know is what they're getting. And if you know a cat is an older black cat who's going to be in the shelter for a long time, from the very beginning, you should be planning what that cat needs. He gets a bigger room. He gets a foster home. He gets things planned more in advance. And it's okay for you to move other cats through fast so that you have those people to provide those things for that black cat, so that you have those fosters, so that you have the enrichment and you can get them out of cage time. It's just about kind of maximizing the resources for everyone. So if people feel that that's unfair, try to help them see that it's actually the most fair thing. Like, we care about all the cats so much, that's why we're doing this. And it shouldn't be first come, first serve, because that's a very passive sort of way to manage things. Like, we should be managing our animals so that it's best for all of them. Okay.
Isn't it true, sorry, that the black older cat will still have the same length of stay even if they had that neuter appointment?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So you don't want to create bottlenecks for the black older cat. If the black older cat has an adopter, but like this procedure needs to be done before adoption, then obviously that should be prioritized. But if you know that most black older cats stay in your shelter for at least a few weeks, and he just came in, so basically you should be making these decisions in a way that doesn't unnecessarily prolong the length of stay for long stay animals, and that is possible to do, and that's a really good point. You shouldn't just like suddenly give that appointment away if the animal really needs it, and that makes a difference in his day and when he goes home.
So Amelia, so what you're saying then, it's really important to do active animal management, do your rounds daily, know who's coming in, plan your flow through.
Yes, exactly. And we're going to talk about that under optimal animal management. But yeah, it's really important. You have to have that big picture in mind, because if you always have that big picture, and I'm talking mostly to the branch managers now, if you always have that big picture in mind, that's part of your responsibility to the animals in your care, to your population, then you can just quickly make those decisions. Your ACA comes to you, hey, which of these cats should go for neuter? Okay, this one. And then you're helping them, also coaching them and thinking about animal management in that way. So we're going to talk about two kind of outflow things, and then we'll talk about intake and kind of what we do for the animals in care. It's a little bit backwards, but that's because the adoption-driven capacity is really a backward, like it's using the outflow to make decisions. So that's why we're starting sort of at the end and then working our way backwards. I think that we already talked about all of these things around fast tracking. I think you guys have already identified all of them. So we can send these slides out. You should be able to download them, but we can also send them out if anybody wants copies later. So adopter-friendly adoption process based on trust. And this ties into number 6 as well, which is adoption promotions and fee adjustments. This is another one that I think really scares people. So just want to put that out there. It's okay to be afraid. But because the formula that underpins this entire program, all of the science and all of the data comes from adoption-driven capacity. So if we didn't talk about what happens to animals on the other end as they leave our care, then we wouldn't be really doing this in a comprehensive way. And I think that that's really important, and maybe was missed in the beginning. When I talk to people about capacity for care, a lot of times they just think it's all about intake and managing intake or even limiting intake. But it's not, right? Because what it's really all about is adoption. So what it's really all about is finding great life outcomes for these animals. So as part of that, Kim has provided a really great resource this year, the Adopters Welcome materials and webinars and workbook. But we can just quickly go through, what does it look like to have an adopter-friendly adoption process that's based on trust? Why do you keep zooming in? I'm just going to back up. So we need to go from looking for ways to say no to looking for ways to say yes. And it's very stressful to do that. And when I started in sheltering, it's like, okay, we all came to this because we love animals, we want to help them, we want them to come to us, we can take the best care of them. And it's hard to let them go. And we judge other people like, oh, that rescue doesn't do home checks. Oh, they don't check vet references. Oh, like, yeah, no, bad. So I think that's normal. But what we're going to talk about for the next two kind of elements is suspending any kind of dogma and anything that we came to the table with and doing something that's scary, which is looking at it from the adopter standpoint and from the community standpoint. So what does it look like when your adoption process is based on trust? What do you guys think it looks like?
You're matching personality of cat and just like needs and lifestyles instead of saying you won't take care of this animal appropriately. You'll just find them the best match, suitable.
Yeah, so it's all about matchmaking and having a conversation. It doesn't mean that you're not that there is no process around adoptions. It's just doing it a bit differently. So I love that. It's looking at it as trying to make the right match, trying to find a way to say yes, but so that the animal gets the right home that you've matched. What else?
Does it mean making exceptions for people, say like financially and things like that, if you think that they'll go to a good home and trusting that they'll have a good home, so you make adjustments to that?
Yeah, so it means not just making adjustments, but it means kind of suspending judgment, I think, in a lot of cases. So a lot of times what we used to do was based on kind of traditional, like a pass fail, so there was an application and it asked like, have you ever returned an animal? Have you ever declawed an animal? Have you ever put an animal to sleep for financial reasons? Have you ever done this? Landlord, vet, everyone in the family meeting the animal, pets as gifts, like all of these things. That we thought we have to do all of this because we have to find the safest home. And in our mind is always that one animal who went to like the guy, the student, adopted by a student. Students don't have very much money, they're transient, and a lot of people are hesitant to adopt them. So like that one time that they were adopted by a student and then they were abandoned, they were hit by a car and they came in DOA. And like that sticks in your mind, right? But then all the other times that we adopted a cat to a student and the student ended up having a professional income and, adopting animals for the rest of their lives, like we don't think about that. We maybe know about that, but we don't think about it. So not allowing, just like animals, we learn from like those few negative things very profoundly, but not allowing that to affect how we look at people. And that may mean that in some cases, if it's a healthy middle-aged cat and we're not anticipating problems, maybe we know that the owner doesn't have a ton of money for veterinary care, but we still think that's the best match. The cat is better in that home than the cat would be in the shelter.
So Graham and Tracy both have something. Graham says it's a two-way street. We give trust, it will come back. Therefore, they will trust us when they need help.
Yes, that's true. So when I give student tours, I often will ask the students, has anyone ever tried to adopt an animal from an animal shelter and been rejected or left feeling like they were being judged, or they left feeling negative and they left without an animal? Mm-hmm. And these are UBC students, so they're like young, like this is like this year. And in one session, 40% of the students raised their hand. And that's very sad because we know that most animals are not acquired from shelters. There's a huge amount of potential for more people to acquire animals from shelters as opposed to from some other source. We know that animals from shelters are spayed and neutered and vaccinated and they have ID, and like there's so many reasons why these are great animals that we should encourage people to acquire. Yet we still have like a lot of people in our communities who view shelters with some level of apprehension or have left feeling bad. And what Graham said is totally true. Like if they need help in the future, they're not going to reach out to the shelter because they'll feel like they were rebuffed or rejected and they just went in wanting to help an animal and they left feeling bad. And I don't know about you guys, but that type of like shame and judgment is very powerful for people and it stays with them. So we really need to try in all of our communications, customer service, but particularly around adoptions, to avoid kind of creating that emotional state in members of our community.
So Tracy's got two: removal of application in favor of a survey, and removal of barriers, vet checks, landlord checks.
Yeah, so I'm glad she listed out the specific barriers, because I was going to talk about that. So in Adopters Welcome, they talk about it more, but in the past we've done landlord checks, home checks, veterinarian references, which there are some confidentiality issues around even doing veterinarian references and like calling vets and demanding client information. If you're not a constable, you actually legally can't really do that. But we were doing it. Pets as gifts. How many of you guys were always thought like adopting pets as gifts is definitely a bad idea. Like that will never go well. Like there's a much higher chance of something going wrong. Never.
I've got like 2 dogs as gifts. I had them for 17 years.
Great, because your experience is positive, right? You got dogs as gifts and you were a great guardian and everything went really well. Other people who have not had a positive or negative experience, I think in animal welfare, we often are like, well, that person isn't prepared for the animal. They don't want the animal. Like, how do we know that they'll take good care of them? And so in terms of removing barriers, doing home checks, vet references, requiring everyone in the family to meet the animal, like rejecting people for things like having declawed a cat in the past, like those types of things instead of having a conversation. Or if they really want a declawed cat, like, hey, they do come into our shelters, unfortunately. What are the other
screens on the windows?
Oh yeah, like
That's
checking
a
their
huge
house.
one in Vancouver.
Right, screens on the windows, they're ahead of their fence. Have you ever had a cat that went outside? Have you ever returned an animal to a rescue agency?
I think some of our branches too, a couple, are still asking for photos of yards.
Photos of yards. So maybe you're not doing the home check, but you are asking the person to provide a photo. So you're creating an atmosphere where it's pass fail, and your staff are spending time to evaluate that photo. So I don't think any of you are overstaffed. I strongly believe that. I believe that everybody in our branches works incredibly hard, and we are generally, we don't have enough resources for what we're trying to do. So when you have staff who are spending time on all of these activities, it may feel like, oh, in our community, there's like some sketchy people and we have to do this. But in reality, what you're saying is, it's more important for my staff to spend time on this than it is for them to spend time, socializing the animals or building a foster program or working with the volunteers. And I think we need to really think before we do that, because actions express priorities. And when we are asking our staff to engage in these activities that put up barriers for adopters, we're telling them that that's important. And I think that that comes from kind of, it's important that we don't do that. It's important that we always engender trust, and that even if an animal, you might not have an animal that's right for a family that comes in, and you can say, we don't have the right animal for you right now, and talk to them about going to another shelter or rescue or coming back another day. It doesn't mean say yes to everyone every time, but just trying to have that outlook. And then I just want to, we'll go over the slide in case we missed anything, but there are a couple of studies on pets as gifts, showing that pets that are given as gifts are not more likely to be returned to shelters. They're not more likely to have a bad outcome. And one of the studies actually showed that they're more likely to have higher levels of attachment, because often when someone gives you a pet as a gift, it's not just about the pet, it's about the person that gave you the pet. So as a vet, I've worked with lots of clients where it's like, oh, this pet was given to me by my mother, but this was my husband's dog and he died, and like that level of attachment is really motivating for people to continue to care for that pet, to deal with medical and behavioral issues. And so pets that are given as gifts may actually be finding better homes. And no one has done a study on pets that were adopted from shelter or rescue agencies that were given as gifts. So obviously there needs to be more data collected. Those studies were done on pets given as gifts in a general sense, like purchased and given as gifts. But what a lot of our shelters have started doing with great success is gift adoptions, but all the usual sort of matchmaking still applies, and we want to make sure that the person has expressed a desire for a pet and generally has the ability to care for a pet, but it doesn't mean that that person even needs to come into the shelter and meet the animal.
I'm just going to keep us on track for time.
Yeah, okay, sorry. So we're just going to go into the next slide.
Mila, can I just add two things though? One is, when you're doing a reference of a reference, you might as well do a reference of a reference of a reference of a reference of a reference.
Like
because you don't know that person you're talking to on the other end.
Right.
Yet you are putting all your credit into that person to say, yes, this person's a good home, but what's their measurement, right? Mm-hmm. So you don't have that. And I'm a regional manager of a Lower Mainland, and I've rehomed an animal. So you telling me that I wouldn't adopt me?
I think a lot of us have rehomed animals or returned or let cats go outside because they were miserable indoors.
Yeah, or it wasn't the right match at the right time, and it wasn't in that animal's best interest.
Yeah.
So I think we need to look at people as that just because they rehomed an animal doesn't mean it's the worst thing for that animal.
In fact, it probably means that it was the best thing for that animal because they demonstrated that they cared enough to know that they weren't the right situation.
Can I just ask what the survey, I know somebody on there had mentioned something about a survey approach as opposed to an application approach. What does the survey look like as opposed to the application?
The survey's based more on what you're looking for in a cat. So we used to have a two-sided application, which asked you if you had a house or an apartment, and then asked for bylaws and things like that. We asked if you had a fence and how high. If you've ever returned an animal or what happened to your last animal. A lot of questions about how much money does it cost for vet, food, and other care. So, and then on the other side, we asked things like, oh, do you want a cat that's cuddly? Do you want a cat that wakes you up at night? Like, are you okay with that? And people did fill out that part as well. But then we're finding that people focused on the questions on the other side. Oh, so Allie, your other cat died at 3? What happened? And you're like, oh my God. And you start crying and you're like, it was hit by a car, and you're like, oh, you let your cat outside. Like, and then right away it's like, no cat for you, right? Right. And not based on how much you realize that was a mistake or that was the best thing for the cat, and that you just want another cat that could live in your apartment, and that's going to
survey is more like what they're looking for.
It's more talking versus based on
more education.
Why we're going to find you being not appropriate for a home. Yeah.
Yeah, so this slide just shows all the things we just talked about. Kim wants to get to the number 8.
No, I'm just watching because it's 20 to 12.
No, yeah, I know. Okay, so the Adopters Welcome has some non-negotiables. So even though we want to be a lot more open with our adoptions, there are some things that are non-negotiables. Those are that the animal, and this comes from best practices that are international, but those are that the animal always has to be spayed or neutered prior to adoption, dogs, cats, and rabbits. There can be no history of animal or child abuse. They can't be intoxicated or high at the time of the adoption. That does not mean that they cannot use substances at any other time. They just can't, their judgment can't be impaired when they sign the paperwork. They can't be intended as a food source, and the adopters have to provide a photo ID. So it has to be the person, and they have to be of age to adopt. So sorry that isn't on there, but I think that's 19 here. Is that right? Okay. The last thing I wanted to say is part of trusting adopters starts when they are interacting with the animals. So I cannot tell you how many times I've been to branches or heard volunteers in branches or staff in branches admonishing people not to touch the cats. So I've gone to shelters where there's a huge sign that says don't touch the cats, or a small sign, or just people who are stationed there saying don't touch the cats, don't touch the cats, don't touch the cats. I literally heard this 2 days ago. There was a study out of UC Davis. It was not published, but I can send people the information it was not published in a journal, but I can send you guys the information if you want it, showing that the type of interaction that adopters have with cats is not by far the most likely thing to spread disease in shelters. If disease is going to be spread by people, it's going to be spread by the staff. So that's why biosecurity is important. So allowing adopters to touch the cats, designing the fronts of cages where they're partially open for both cats and dogs, so that they can touch and they can smell and they can choose, right? They can choose and they can like fall in love and they can choose you. Like the cat chose me. How many times have you heard that? Adopters should be allowed to touch the animals unless there's a specific contraindication why they shouldn't, and that is part of our animal management policies, and that is a job expectation. So when we go to shelters and we see signs and hear people talking about how that no one should be touching the animals, what we really want to change that to is please wash your hands in between touching the animal. Please don't touch the animals if they're asleep or they don't want to be touched. Like looking at it that way, not to say it should be a free-for-all, but just let's change that conversation, and that's something that we will be following up on too to provide more resources. So this is related, and this is also about the way that animals leave the shelter. So for some reason I always see Graham's comments and no one else's, so that happened to be looking at the screen. So one potential barrier to adoption in some cases is the adoption fee. And the adoption fee is what it is. But that doesn't mean that it can't change. Branch performance, we do track it, of course. We should be tracking all of these metrics. But branch performance, it's clear in operations that it's based more on length of stay and welfare indicators and adoption numbers overall than it is on the actual adoption revenue. So if you have a cat in care for 87 days and you end up only getting half an adoption fee at the end of that 87 days, and you don't get that $75 you would have gotten, like holding out for that 87 days to get that whole adoption fee is not admirable. It's not good for the cat, and it's not a good idea. So, and you don't have to do it. You're not going to get in trouble if you start waiving or reducing adoption fees for individual animals. So can anybody share an example of what they do around adoption fee, either waiving or reducing, outside of the big provincial promotions that we do, which are also part of this, but everybody has access to those. So, anyone?
I'll waive fees on animals if they have ongoing medical, for sure. If the new adopter is willing to take the medical on, then I don't even charge an adoption fee. If I've had a cat, specifically a cat, 21 days, we'll usually do 50% off. To me, the adoption fee really means nothing, because once an animal's been there for a very long time, it's more important to get it out, so it really isn't the end of the world.
Yeah, that's awesome. So we encourage branches to look at your length of stay and pick a number, like 21 days is a good number, where after that, all of those animals will have some sort of special promotion. You'll reduce their adoption fee, you'll create a hashtag for them, whatever you want to do, those cats that are in care longer. There are studies that show that cats that are adopted through fee waived or reduced events do not have lower attachment scores, do not have lower veterinary care utilization, and do not have higher return rates. So there's no evidence to suggest that waiving adoption fees results in sort of devaluing the cats or giving them homes that aren't as good. If people question it, that's a question that we get a lot. Well, we're trying to increase the value of cats. Why would we make this cat free? If you message it so that this is a staff favorite, he's been here a long time, or this adoption is sponsored, you're not saying like, oh, sale, all the cats that have been here, like if you message it so that you're recognizing the value of the cat so much that you value them so much that what you said, you want them to be in a home, it's more important than getting that full fee. It also costs money to keep them in the shelter every day. Mm-hmm. So please adjust their fees, reduce their fees, do promotions on social media. All of the things that we talk about, and base that on length of stay. So maybe don't do that if you think they're going to get adopted fast, but do that if you start to anticipate a longer length of stay, then that's when you would do that. Don't wait till they've been there for 150 days and then do it. So we talk about doing periodic promotions. Jody mentioned significant medical problems, sometimes also behavior, if their length of stay is prolonged. And then I mentioned that there are studies specifically in cats, several studies that were published in journals that talk about how this doesn't reduce the quality of the homes that they find. So our minds should be open, and you guys should all know that the branches have discretion to reduce adoption fees in individual cases.
We did try the pick your price, and that didn't work.
Oh, I think you mentioned that before.
We did a provincial one, and it was come in, pick your price, and it was really uncomfortable for people. They had a hard time, and
so I think that's around the messaging. I think people start to get uncomfortable when you're sort of like, unless it's a parody, like some of those funny videos that some shelters made last year, like comparing cats to used cars and things, but it was like a cute parody. If you're actually sort of like making them like a commodity, I think it makes people uncomfortable. But yeah, you can message it in a positive way. And there's another study that showed that adopters are more likely to respond to a long length of stay as part of a promotion. So like if the fee is reduced because of their length of stay, you attract a certain type of person to that. Like people are motivated by different things, right? People are motivated by deals. But if it is connected to length of stay, that resonates with some people. Like, oh, this poor cat. I need to go get him. Yeah, Christy.
I've also heard staff too, where it's, like, oh, if somebody comes up to the front, they're like, oh, this is the adoption fee, like $149. Wow, that's a lot. And then as soon as that person walks away, it's like, well, if they can't even afford $149, why are they shouldn't be adopting a cat, right? So
yeah, and
that mentality too that we kind of need to.
And it doesn't mean that they can't afford $149. It just means that their perception of $149 for a shelter cat is they perceive that as a barrier. And some people perceive the price of like coffee at Starbucks every day as a barrier, and some people don't, right? Yeah. So we have to kind of acknowledge that like there are different perceptions that doesn't necessarily bear on their ability to care for that animal. That's a very, very good point.
And that's an opportunity for education too, to explain how much we put into each animal and what the value is, and if they were to get that cat off Craigslist and then needed to spay and neuter it and vaccinate it, exactly. The cost would be even higher, right? Yeah.
Yeah, but that's a really good point. That there might be staff who are uncomfortable with this because they're not fully there with the trust with the community, and there's a default of like viewing people in an adversarial way when they come in. Okay, we're gonna skip this one.
I'm good.
Okay, Michelle's good. So there's just a couple more. Communication is really fast. So we'll spend the rest of the time talking mostly about managing intake and optimal animal management, which are related. So now we're shifting, right? We're going backwards. We're shifting to what happens on the front end. What happens when you take animals in and before you take animals in. So how many of you have had your board member or community chairperson or volunteers or staff who basically felt like C4C was equivalent to restricting intake and turning people away who need help?
Oh, of course, yeah.
Okay. So I hope that this looking at all the 9 elements and talking through it helps with tools on how to kind of communicate that it's so much more than that. But the truth is that there is an intake management component, right? So it's called managed intake or scheduled intake. And what it means is that when we're looking at our true capacity for intake, we're not just looking, we've always managed intake, right? If you don't have enough cages, then you don't take in animals. So this is just expanding that to looking at the true capacity when you decide who and what and when to take in cats. So can anybody just shout out how this might look in our branches as you're actively managing intake and starting to think about even before they come in, when someone contacts you? Because often, not always, someone does contact us before they come. So what does it look like? Like, what do you do? What does your staff do?
Jerry, come on, Jerry.
I'll just jump in. I was just waiting. Someone was typing. One of the things we try and do is look at the number of cats we have that are going to be fast-tracked. So with us, when we have people that are waiting to bring their animal in, we can actually give them a rough idea. It's like, you know what, we'll be able to take your cat in tomorrow, and then we try and plan it. And also with us too, we get a lot of seniors, and if we get too many seniors, our fast track is gone because now we have 15, 16-year-old cats we have to try and find homes for. So with me, the staff are very good at coming to me and saying, this is what we have. And, I look at our numbers and then I'll be able to give them a rough idea to plan when we can help that person out.
So you're not saying no, you're just saying yes, but we can't help you today.
Yes.
And this is when we think we can help you, and here are some other things you might try. If they have a cat who's peeing outside the box, or a senior cat that's doing, like I know that you guys are really great about recommending that they go see a vet, or that sort of thing. Yeah. So just kind of yes, but giving resources and providing a timeline.
Yes.
Yes. That's perfect.
So Jerry says letting people know that we are trying to schedule a transfer and the space will be available when the transfer is complete.
Yeah, so again, forward looking, thinking about when that space might open up. Anybody else have anything to share?
Be the same for strays too, right? If you have too many cats in your care and there's someone bringing in a stray, to say, could you hold on to the cat, and then you can provide the litter and some food if they're willing to do that in their home or their washroom.
What we've done, we tried a few years ago was somebody found a stray, and if they're willing to keep it, we booked it in, did a physical intake, did everything, and then placed it in foster
vaccine
again as
and
a stray.
then foster. Okay.
Right, and like scanning for microchip, that sort of thing.
And then after the stray period, these people, the ones we did it with, actually adopted the cat. Never spent any time in the shelter.
That's smart. That's true. Get it in, check the check the ID.
So those are like finder to foster or foster conversion programs. They work great for strays. They work great for underage kittens. People find like the nest of kittens that mom left and they're 6 weeks old, and like explain that we can't take them until 8 weeks. We don't have fosters. Provide support and resources. If possible, doing an intake exam, so we can check. But even if an intake exam cannot be done, just saying, hey, can you hang on to this cat for a couple of days? We'll take his description in case an owner comes forward. I wouldn't want people to not do it because they couldn't do an intake exam at that time, though an intake exam is optimal. But just saying like, hey, we have to hold on to him for 4 days anyway. Would you mind keeping him at your house? A lot of outdoor cats do have homes. They have outdoor homes. They're community cats. So they're much more likely to actually find their owner if they stay near where they were found. And that often means the person who found them lives near where the owner is. And so many times these animals might not even come into the shelter at all.
So we've done the same thing again with another cat, but what we did is we put a collar on it for them in case it got out of their house with our tag on it. Cat ended up again in the shelter, and people are like, we can't take care of it this time. It got out of our property, and then the owners, I guess, had taken the collar off, and they showed up to pick the cat up. So,
Interesting.
yeah.
That's so interesting.
Do you
Yeah.
Do you get more left out, sort of just at the shelter, at the door, sort of thing, if you're saying no to people, or if you're not necessarily saying no, but you're limiting people bringing them in?
Nope.
You don't find that?
No.
I think not in the Lower Mainland. I think you might get it. I don't know about Tracy and Graham, but in the north you might get that a little bit more. And then there's people that can't really wait, or they're overwhelmed, so they don't necessarily, or they threaten that they're going to drown them or shoot them. So yeah, we do.
And that's why you should always know what your true capacity is. And that's why you should, if you stay within your C4C, then you'll have capacity. So those are emergencies. And our branches in the north and the interior, the staff are very good at knowing when that emergency occurs. So that's why you have to have conversations with these people, just like you would with an adopter. And Iris, and I'm really glad you said that, because part of managed intake is not just like, okay, we'll put you on the wait list. Like if they're like, I'm going to shoot this cat and this isn't my, like ascertaining whether it's an emergency. Is the cat's welfare going to be worse if they go back out with this person? Is the person threatening them? Is it an emergency where the cat needs, that's where the safety net and they need us? We should always find a way to take those cats. We would never, ever recommend or imply that those animals that are in that emergency situation shouldn't be allowed to come in. So it's about managing capacity, so we have room for those. And then some staff in some branches, like I know Katie's on the line, are very skilled at figuring out when that emergency is actually happening based on the conversation with that person.
So Tracy had a good point too. They have Kelowna, they have an active wait list, so they spay neuter cats on the list, which will fast track on intake or result in the owner keeping the cat.
Yeah, so it's actually going to share the example of the program in Kelowna, but I don't think we have time, but I'll quickly, it'll be in the slides. So thinking about providing support in that interim period, whether it's spay neuter, whether it's an intake exam, standing for a microchip, providing litter boxes and food to somebody who finds kittens, just thinking about what support your branch can provide for a few days at little or no cost, that would promote trust, give the cat what the cat needs, and maybe give the cat an alternate to even entering the shelter at all.
And Tracy says she's agreed to empower frontline staff to make those determinations. And Graham had something before that saying, same as Iris, case by case, if the person seems volatile or isn't going to maintain good welfare.
Yeah, and we should always be taking those. Definitely, this is not meant to imply that those emergency situations should be turned away, because we do get those. And there are branches that get more abandoned, but those aren't always people who've even reached out to us. Sometimes they're just abandoned.
In my experience too, a lot of people who go on a wait list for even a couple of days will often find a friend or family member to actually take their animal. So when you get to call them, they're like, oh, thanks, I've actually found a home and I still get to see him. I'm so happy. And so it's actually a better opportunity for them, because sometimes the quick decision is I have to rehome my animal shelter.
Yeah.
Where they don't actually spend that little bit of extra time to try and find them a placement with someone they might know.
Yeah, and it's our job to kind of help people in the community think of the shelter as an extension of the community, but not as a one-off. Like in the past, it was like, don't want your animal? Take it to the shelter. Work in the shelter? Take the animal. Like it's all a continuum, right? Like we're all integrated into the community, and we should be sharing, well, we can't take your cat because of this, and like having those conversations goes a really long way, and you might also help other people who then know kind of what the interaction was. So I think it ripples outwards. So this is just what we kind of what we already went through. There is this pilot that occurred in the Kelowna branch that Tracy was talking about. It's going to be in the slides, but we don't have too much time to talk about it right now. But they actually spay and neuter the cats, and they found that only 75% of them end up actually following through and surrendering the animal. The rest, either the behavioral issue has resolved with spay neuter, or they found, like Sarah said, they found another community option.
And they stopped the cycle because the animals been spayed or neutered.
And they stopped the cycle. And I will just mention, which goes to what Jody was saying before, when the Kelowna branch started this program, 80% of the cats in their care were sick, and they were constantly overwhelmed, and that doubled their C4C. And this was one of the things that they did on their own to help address the problem, and it worked really well in their community. So they still have a wait list sometimes, but it's shorter. So the last thing that we want to talk about, other than communication, which is basically just make sure that communication is thorough, is optimal animal management. And this is definitely worth spending the next 4 minutes on.
We can go over?
Yeah, we can go over a little bit. If people need to drop off the call, that's totally fine. the people in the room are actually scheduled to be here till 3, but I know the webinar is only scheduled until noon. So in terms of optimal animal management, this is important because we've talked about what happens on the end when they leave. We talked about what happens when they come in and how to house them. But how they flow through the shelter and all of the decisions that we make as they go through the shelter is critically important and is essential to succeed in capacity for care. So you'll never fully implement this program in your branch if your animal management is not optimal, if there are lots of areas to improve within the way you manage the animals on a day-to-day basis. And I want to hear from you how you do this, but the other thing I'll say is that our job, every single one of us who works in the shelters, with the shelters, the way we should be thinking about it is that every animal in that shelter, every day, their next day should be better than the one before. It should be better and they should be more adoptable. If they're not, then action needs to be taken. And that's why the animal management systems that we're going to talk about for the next 3 minutes are so important. It's to know when action is required. We are not just passively taking in animals, as many as we have cages for, and then they go out sort of also through some sort of passive process. Like, we need to manage them before they come in, as they come in, while they're in our care, and the way that they flow out into the community. And Graham actually had a great quote from a training that we did a couple of weeks ago that was that we don't allow the shelter to manage us, we manage the shelter. And I love that because it really showed sort of the newer philosophy of sheltering, and that we are empowered to make a lot of small decisions along the way for the animals and take a lot of small actions that add up to something big and add up to good health and welfare for all the animals in our care. So I can stop talking. How do you guys, what are the elements, what do your staff do to ensure that animal management is optimal in your branches? Like, what do you do every day?
Daily rounds, multiple times.
Daily rounds, multiple times. You just spend the whole day doing rounds.
No.
Yeah, daily
so
rounds.
Your emergency rounds, your management rounds, your closing rounds.
So AM, PM emergency, and daily rounds. I want you to say a couple more things about daily rounds. So why are daily rounds so important? Who should be doing them?
Management or some kind of delegate. Just to go through, like you said, making sure the animal is better than the day before, seeing if there's anything missed, something that we can do to fast track that animal, if it's missing a spay or neuter appointment, if it's not in the best placement for somebody to view it, if you've got a frustrated cat in a 2-bank and you've got a room available, like things like that, and many more.
So looking at the animal, looking at their environment and how they interact with it, looking if they're where they need to be, if they have all the things they need, like everything's in Shelter Buddy, they have all the appointments that they need, their profile, they have a good picture, all of those things. How long have they been there? Yeah. Looking at the facility, is it leaking? Is it clean? Like, looking at all of those things, that's part of daily rounds, and that's part of the branch manager is responsible for that, and then sometimes they might delegate it to someone, but that needs to be done every single day.
Tracy says low stress handling.
Low stress handling. So starting when they come in, we can engender a positive emotional state as much as possible. That will carry through, making them less apprehensive, making them more adoptable, and giving them better welfare, and easier to handle and safer to handle for the staff, and better welfare for the staff the whole time that they're with us. I thought Kim might have more to say.
I was just going to say, identifying the animals that are in your shelter that might need a plan. If they're not doing well on the second day, we need to plan as soon as possible how we're going to get that animal out, whether it's getting our volunteers to work with it more, finding foster, but getting that plan and identifying it right away rather than waiting for the animal to decrease behaviorally, and then sometimes they just don't come back and having to make a difficult decision.
Yeah, so the saddest thing that everybody knows that you've all experienced is when an animal's in our care for like a year and then we have to euthanize the animal for behavior reasons or welfare reasons. Trying to make the same decisions but making them faster. And part of it is, it's okay if an animal may be showing some things that are worrying you, and the first day your action plan is just monitor, right? Monitor for these, make sure that if your plan is monitor, it needs to be for these specific things. And then the next day, okay, now we know, now we're going to take action. Now we're going to make a plan. So some of the steps might be small. It's not necessarily a big step each day, but you're absolutely right. To know as soon as you need to know, to recognize the problems, describe them, reach out for help if you need help, and then just try to move that animal along their eventual pathway as quickly as possible, because that's what the animal wants.
I think it's no longer acceptable just to have an animal come in and say, well, I know there's something up with them. We're just going to wait for a week and see.
Yes, I totally agree with that.
You're always thinking, you're always planning, like, how am I going to help him? How am I going to make his day better tomorrow? What am I going to do? And to have that plan and everybody committed to it, because, again, it's what used to happen is, oh, we need to do some work with this dog, and then nobody does anything. And then at the end of 2 weeks, it's like,
That used to happen.
Managers then have to, I know, right? But it's not fair. It's not fair to the staff, the volunteers, or the animal, right?
Yeah, and that happens not because anybody doesn't want to do it. It's just because of a lack of capacity and a lack of a system. So that's why Rounds is a system. Rounds is a system that we know works. It's in the Canadian Standards of Care. We know that it works because it does kind of guide you along that pathway. And I agree, monitoring for a week is not acceptable. They should be monitored for a day or 2 days, and then the next action plan kicks in. And it might be something small, like ask a volunteer photographer to take 3 more pictures. It might not be something that directly affects the animal, but affects their adoptability and makes them more likely to someone to fall in love with them. If the animal themselves is okay in their environment, but they've just been there for a long time, then maybe that is the action step that they need, right? So think like big picture when you're thinking about these action steps, but then it needs to be rounds, huddle, animal management discussion with the team, and then action steps that are assigned to someone, and then the manager is following up to make sure that those action steps have occurred, whether it's a huddle log or whatever system you have. So that's our system. And we have AM and PM rounds in the LMS, and then daily rounds. Tim and I can serve as a resource and your regional managers.
Don't forget with rounds, you can't do your rounds without your in-care inventory, because that's a part of it as well. What's happening in Shelter Buddy, what their status is, because same, right? You can't have an animal in your care that you're monitoring and waiting to see what's going to happen for 7 days, meaning their status shouldn't be awaiting behavior modification or awaiting medical treatment for 7 days. There's multiple statuses, and then there's also sub-statuses as well that you can have. And then, like, don't forget, like, if an animal status is stray, 9 days later, if that animal's in your care, you've got to get it out of the stray status into adoption, else it's not going to show up on the website. And that's like poor reception. They get that call a lot where it's like, it's not up to date. Where's the description of this cat? There's no photo of this cat. I want to see these animals. So it's part of it. It's a huge part of it. Shelter Buddy.
And that's why it's a huge part of it. And everyone who kind of works in the shelters, we often like focus so much on the animal, which we should. Everything should be from their perspective. But all of those other systems, putting things into Shelter Buddy, Asilomar, like all of those things help their adoptability and help them move through. So if those things aren't happening on a regular basis, then it's something to evaluate with the team and kind of it's something to check. And also things like light bulbs and running out of AHP and running out of gloves. I've been to shelters, oh, where's your PPE? Oh, we ran out. Like, well, what if a dog with parvo comes in 5 minutes? You got to have all the stuff that you need to take care of the animals, and checking supplies and equipment, and like it's all part of rounds. It's all part of the branch manager's kind of overall area of responsibility. But I'm glad you said that. So with in-care inventories, we recommend printing them every day. I know that
Who recommends? I say you do it.
You do it. You should print it.
Right. So there are branches that don't want to print them every day because of paper and trees. And if it's a small branch where there aren't many coming in, I believe that what we've said is like print it and then update it every day, like write on it every day if something changes, but maybe you only need to print it every other day. That kind of thing. I don't know, Kim, if that's like, or should everyone just be, but every day you should have a clipboard with an up-to-date in-care inventory on paper on that clipboard, no matter how you get there, whether you print it every day or not.
I just don't know how you can manage whether it's 5 animals or 25, 30 different species too, without having something like that. Like if you think of it as a business and you're managing a business, you need to know what your inventory is. You need to know what's coming and going and planning, especially as a manager.
And it shows you how long they've been there. Do they have microchip? Do they have Asilomar? Do they have like all of those things that you need to check that aren't at the level of the animal in the enclosure are on that in-care inventory. So it's all in one place. Yeah. So printing it every day, looking at it every day. Okay. I think there were some. So we talked about pathway planning earlier with Fast Track. Obviously that applies to all animals. I think we've talked about that quite a bit. Low stress handling, Tracy, yes. I wish I had candy to give you over the phone. We might think low stress handling can slip if we're really busy or something. That is when it does slip, but we really can't let it slip. From the standpoint of the animal, it's really crucial. Doing daily rounds consistently monitoring and huddles. So also part of Brown's look at the welfare sheets. Like I can't tell you how often we have unassisted deaths come in and look at the sheets. Oh, they're blank. It wasn't filled out for days. Like we don't know if they're eating, we don't know if they're pooping. Those sheets need to be filled out every day, and then someone needs to look at them and look at the trend. So I've also been to shelters where they were filled out religiously, but yet an animal still lost weight to the point where the animal starved to death and died unassisted. We got to look at look at it from day to day, not just eating less, or same with weekly weights. Like someone should look at the trends in the weekly weights. If it's a kitten or a puppy, like they should be going up every week. Just little things like that. They add up to like really bad things can happen if we don't stay on top of them.
I just want to say too about the welfare sheets and all the documentation. For one, I mean, if we're in the hospital, we have all this documentation for us. It's no different for the animals in our shelters. Plus, we're using them now for investigations for bites. So cat bites, dog bites. If you have a welfare sheet where I'm asking Tracy, let's collect everything, because that information tells us a lot about that animal, how they did coming in, how they are doing in care, which will help us prevent bites, like lower those staff being off for bites, and for the animals if they're not doing it, or maybe they're not using low stress handling. I don't know, but they're very vital.
Yeah, they're very vital. We talked about moving. You talked about a cat that's frustrated in a cage bank being moved into a room. So identifying things like frustration, depression, and then making housing selections appropriately, and then accurate data collecting. So. We talked about entering things in Shelter Buddy, Asilomar, all doing the worksheets every month. All of those things are important because they're tools that help us to know where we are. They help us to get more resources, not just for the animals in your care, but in the future as well, to know what we need to do as an organization. Okay. And then the last one is just communication. And the reason why this is in here is just because with any sort of shelter medicine, any sort of new initiative, program, outbreak, communication is really important, and it's one thing that often gets dropped because everyone's just so focused on the work. I mean, that's totally normal, right? When we do something like this that seems so counterintuitive in so many ways, that causes people to be apprehensive and scared, it's based on science, we know it works, but we have to communicate that and passionately understand it and believe in it and communicate it to everyone. And I will say that we didn't do that with Capacity for Care when it first came out, and like volunteers didn't get any information about it, and it was all very kind of piecemeal. So just wanting to make sure that when you have kind of pockets of resistance to Capacity for Care, that's like when Kim and I work with shelters and there's kind of just consistent problems, illness, welfare issues, prolonged length of stay. When we really get in there and you really overturn the rocks and you really talk to the volunteers and the staff, there tend to be people who don't believe in this program. And I totally understand that, because when you first hear about it, it's hard to buy into it. So it's our job to really take the time with those people and really talk to them about the program and why it works and how it works and what is the science behind it and why do we do it. And we do it in order to actually help more animals, to increase our capacity, to create space for ourselves and the animals so that we can do a better job in the community. It was never meant to limit how much we help. And if you look at the data, it doesn't limit how much we help. So all of these things, messaging to the public and adopters, if they see an empty cage, that's good. To the board, to volunteers, if you see an empty cage, that's an animal who was in our care that went home. It's not, oh, we're not helping somebody in the community. Remember that only 3% of cats in any community, well, in California in studies, but will ever enter a shelter in that community in a year. So we think about all the cats that we have, and whether we have 35 or 55 or 15, that we really think about it, means a lot to us. It means a lot within that system. It's a limited system. But there are so many cats out there that we never touch, that never touch us, that never have the chance to come in. And most of them are fine. So that's kind of a takeaway that when we think about this, we can't let the shelter manage us. We have to manage the shelter. We have to give our animals and our staff good welfare. And staying within our capacity is key. And in the ASV guidelines, it's unacceptable to operate beyond our capacity for care. So the communication piece is really important in having people understand why we're doing it and what we're doing, so it doesn't look like, oh, well, we have empty cages, but we're still, they still said they couldn't take my cat until tomorrow. Like, we don't want people to feel that way. We want them to understand what we're doing. There will always be people who don't understand what we're doing. But my mentor, Kate Hurley, says, as long as you do the right thing, be criticized for that, right? Fully embrace this program, do it completely, and then if people still criticize you because they still don't believe in it, that's fine. But we don't want to be criticized just because we didn't communicate why it's so important and why it's so great to people, because that's just an expectation gap that we have the opportunity to minimize. So this is just obviously the Vancouver shelter, Jess, and it just talks about how it was really important for everyone to communicate with each other, not just for sort of senior management to communicate with branch managers and then everything just sort of happens. We know now that for an initiative like this, we really need like way more communication, which we now recognize. So again, just showing you the infographic. So this is just the end. I just am curious to hear if anybody has any thoughts after hearing about Capacity for Care. When do you think Capacity for Care does not work? Is there a situation where this program doesn't work?
I was just going to say, and it's only a temporary doesn't work, is when we do a large seizure of animals and then we're kind of scrambling to place cats wherever.
Yes.
Not caring for them, obviously, and that, but I think number wise that can be, a little bit difficult. So then we have to make that flow through happen very quickly. And
yeah.
But other than that, it has to work.
It has to work. So why does it have to work?
For everybody. It has to work for the animals, for our sanity, the public, the volunteers that come in, and it does work. I was scared when we started it in Abbotsford because I think we were the third shelter, and it was a panic because we would get over 100 cats in a month. And we dropped down to, our cage space went down to, I think it was 35.
Yeah.
So everybody was panicking, and then within 6 months we were like, holy, this actually works. We didn't have really an ISO anymore, and the sick cats were gone, and everybody was getting adopted quicker, and it was amazing.
So was it painful those 6 months?
Oh gosh, yeah.
It's painful, right? It's really painful.
Yeah.
So does anybody else have any?
Tracy has like an exclamation point when it's not fully implemented.
Oh, Tracy, you stole my next slide. Okay, so basically what Jody and Tracy both said. So when Jody said it has to work, it actually does have to work because it's based on science and it's designed to work in any shelter of any size. That's why there's so many elements that can be managed according to each shelter and community and their needs. The most painful thing, which can drag on for years, I've seen it, is when it's partially implemented. So some of the elements are sort of there and everyone thinks they're like supposed to limit intake, but then like don't have the tools to sort of increase the flow through, and that's very painful. And Jody said Abbotsford got through that stage in 6 months, and there are still shelters who are still in that stage after a few years. So I think it's true that when it's not fully implemented, it doesn't work. And it actually is really painful and awful, and then everybody starts to hate it. But the good news is that it's science-based, it's designed to work in every shelter of every size. Everywhere it's been implemented in the BCSPCA across Canada and in the US, it's resulted in decreased disease, decreased length of stay, increased adoptions, increased ability to save animals' lives. And so I just want to leave everyone with knowing that it does work. You gotta like take the leap and buy into it completely. And when it's fully implemented, it does work. And the operations team is here to support you, because I know that implementation process can be a little bit painful. Okay, questions. So, are there any questions? Anybody who has to leave can head out. But if anybody does have questions that weren't addressed during the discussion, we can take those.
Sorry so much for coming.
Yeah.
Okay, any questions? Are there any questions?
Katie has one. We have some, but Katie has one.
Okay.
Oh, she has to go. Okay, thanks, Katie.
Thanks, Katie.
Katie.
So, can I ask a couple that were
Yes.
on here?
So Kim has some previously submitted questions.
Thanks for joining us, Jeff. Which one?
Thanks, Jeff.
And this may have already been answered. How can we tell the public about Capacity for Care? How do we explain it if it looks like there's space? You've kind of touched on it, but
Like in a succinct manner.
Phrase.
Yeah.
Phrasing.
Yeah, so I actually have several that I made. I made signs for the Kelowna branch when they were implementing their program. So I I have like a whole bunch of sample text for signs. It ranges anywhere from like 1 sentence to like 3 or 4 sentences. It's just all quick. Basically, it focuses on a couple things. One is like a summary of the program and how it works. Like it was developed by UC Davis and it's science-based and it helps animals be more healthy and have better welfare. But there's also a couple that are things like, hey, have you ever lived with a roommate? What if you had like your roommates were constantly rotating, or like things like that, like funny thinking about it from the cat's perspective of how can we sort of, I mean, it was really meant for for communals that were empty or didn't have a full population in them. But really, I think bringing it back to what the cats want and what the cats need and how we can best provide that, and that the number of cages in our shelters is essentially, until very recently, it's essentially random. It's not actually based on statistical analysis of the needs of the community. Now it is going forward, but it wasn't in the past. So some shelters have way fewer cages than they need, and others have way too many. So that's why we need other programs to tell us what our capacity is. And I think it's really just messaging that like more holistic way of looking at capacity and really bringing it back to from the standpoint of the animal. And those would kind of be my general pieces of advice. But yeah, I do have some actual sample text that we can share, if that helps.
Can I ask a question? Yeah. Amelia, what would you, this is the initial response of, obviously this is based to prevent overcrowding. But as we're seeing times of the year that we have a reduced cat population coming in.
Yeah.
What would your key messaging be to branch managers and staff about how this tool can still be utilized in those slow times?
Yeah, so that's actually a really good question. There have been, more recently, people have contacted us saying, well, I'm worried about C4C because I'm always under. Like, it was historically meant as a tool to help prevent us from being over. But I'm like, I can't even get enough cats to match what my adoption driven capacity calculated from the last 2 years is. And I think there's a few things. I think it's still very important to do the worksheets because the worksheets help you and also your regional managers and Kim and I to kind of know what the population looks like and to best provide support. For example, if you have lots of animals in foster, that might be a win because you have a great foster program, or it might be because more pieces need to be in place to monitor that. It's kind of hard to know. So I think that the worksheet is always a tool for population management, and it's not necessarily something only to be used during the most dire times. I think that we need to think about how we define success, and whether we define success as having all the cages full, or whether we define it as not having to say no to people, or how we define it. I know that there are some mixed messages within the organization, and that's something that we're going to have to explore more in terms of really, like we started the leadership conference, really talking through how do we define success in sheltering and how do we define success here, and what can we be doing with those resources to still help animals in the community, even if we can't sort of get enough cats, because it is a source of fear and anxiety for us when we don't even have enough cats to sort of occupy the resources that we're used to spending. And I think that's it's very exciting to be in that position, and it's something that we need to look at as an organization. How can we best be who we need to be in the community? There's lots of need out there. Maybe it's not met best by traditional sheltering of cats. Maybe it's met best in other ways. That's not for me to decide, but I think there are discussions that we need to have that the branches should be heavily involved in about what does that look like. I don't know if that helps. It's kind of a hard question to answer. Kim, do you?
Well, I want to add too, with the numbers coming down, a lot of the animals and the cats have more maybe behavioral issues, or emotionally they're not doing as well, maybe they're under-socialized. So there's other things that we could be teaching or having the staff do, because if they are those ones staying a bit longer, they're going to require more time. So even if your numbers are down, there's more time involved in these other cats that maybe aren't being fast-tracked, aren't going through, and we have to teach the staff how to work with them to help them.
And do it quickly, right? Yeah. To make decisions quickly, and not because you don't have very many cats. I think that's, maybe this is what you're talking about. Those are the cats that kind of lag for 7 days and under behavior modification or waiting for medical treatment, and it's kind of they lag, and then kind of at 17 days, someone's like, oh, this cat's been in care for a while, right? Yeah.
And the low stress handling, so they're always focusing, because our standards of care have gone way up. So it's even our intake, I think it's 15 minutes they estimate when you're calculating per per animal per cat for staff doing intakes. Well, maybe that's gone up now when you have these under-socialized cats coming in, or not even under-socialized. Maybe a cat that's been in the back of a pickup truck, bounced all the way to the shelter, coming in and scared. So you want to take that time to do that, to bring them in, so they have a good experience, so that they adapt quicker and can be flowed out into adoption.
I'd also add that it's a good opportunity to look at what your staffing resources are and to use the tool to say, okay, this month I think I'm going to have the ability to be able to allocate those staffing resources to community initiatives or to doing more projects towards what you're talking about with rehabilitation, I'm doing quotes, or general support, or classes or what have you.
Right. Like maybe they want to start a food bank. Maybe they want to there's all different things that could be done.
We could do the microchip clinic this year.
Exactly. Working with the vets. There's so many things we could do. I think we sort of need to decide what we want to do. But Kim's right. The animals that are coming in are taking up a lot more time and money. A healthy kitten that just needs basic care will cost a certain amount, and we know that amount. It's fixed. But an older cat that needs a dental and has borderline kidneys and needs blood work, that cat might cost 30 times more. We're not talking about a small amount. We're talking about an exponential amount of time and money that increases as we take in more medical and behavioral cases. To really do behavior cases well, we might need a staff member to spend 4 hours a day with one animal, where our animal care allotment is 15 minutes for care, for feeding and cleaning. So the way that we're looking about the care that we provide needs to change based on what the animals are telling us that they need, and there's a lag there that we need to work on, because even if we are doing more community work, there are still the animals coming in because we're their safety net and we're their only option, and those animals are needing a lot more than they used to. So I think we're looking at putting those resources into place and figuring out what that looks like, because I think you're totally right about that.
I just send a message saying if anybody has any further questions to email me, and then we'll follow up with them.
Yeah, that's perfect.
And with the other questions too, we'll follow up with those. It's just we only have till 12:30.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, thank you so much to everybody who had the patience to log in and call in and participate on a webinar. It's our first time doing this, so we really, really appreciate it that you guys were here. It was huge contributions. Email us if you need anything, and then for everybody who's in the room, we'll wrap up, and then we're gonna reconvene after lunch. Thank you.